Good day everyone, I am Noevie Saldo, your presenter 11 for this lesson. Part 3. Part 3 is the empirical findings for technical and vocational education training performance. Part 3 presents empirical findings on several areas are used to gauge TVET performances from employment outcomes and to the impact of scholarships. Each chapter is drawn from background studies commissioned as the part of the TVET sector study. Also the release as individual working papers. In this chapter, it will provide an overview of employment outcomes for TVET graduates and also an overview to returns for TVET graduates, estimating the private rates of return of TVET at the upper secondary, post-secondary, and tertiary level. For the employment outcomes for technical and vocational training graduates, under effective skills development and programs such as TVET, can upskill and reskill the workforce and improve their other overall employability and employment outcomes in the face of Industry 4.0. One of the primary goals of TVET as the TESDA NSTDP 2018-2022 is to equip the trainees with useful and relevant skills to make them workforce ready and globally competitive. Youth are particularly at risk due to the persistently high unemployment over the past decade and now incur higher risk of displacement as a result of COVID-19. In this chapter, it will provide an overview of literature assessing employment outcomes globally from skills development programs and present the methodology, findings, and conclusions to the assessment outcomes. Employment outcomes from TVET in recent literature. There are myriad studies assessing the employment effects of active labor market programs such as TVET on the youth in different country development contexts. The empirical evidence across countries and regions varies. As you can see in the figure 8.1, youth and underemployment rate 2006 to 2016. On the graph identified, estimated impacts are mixed with range and contrasting findings across available studies. Although TESDA collects and publishes regular statistics, the graduate tracer surveys and studies, example, employment and satisfaction survey reports, on TVET graduates, the literature estimating the employment impact of TVET in the Philippines has been scant. The employment outcomes are determined by both demand side and supply side factors, and the interaction of the two. Employability is an important indicator where the current quantity and quality of technical and vocational education and training or the TVET graduates match the industry needs and standards and employers' expectation. Using the Philippine Enterprise Survey of World Bank in 2015, Acosta present evidence of inadequate workforce skills, particularly in terms of socio-emotional skills, usually known as the non-cognitive skills or the soft skills or behavioral skills. About one-third of employees cites difficulty in filing vacancies, primarily attributing to the skills shortage of applicants. We have also here the methodological approach uses treatment effects, method, and probabilistic regression techniques for the assessment of employment outcomes of TVET. We are interested in three sets of outcomes: sample, labor force, participation, employment, and underemployment status. Under treatment effects estimators, since treatment status in this case is obtained from observational data, it is therefore not randomized. This suggests that our outcome and treatment variables are not necessarily independent. Thus, we use treatment effects estimators to utilize the covariates to ensure the treatment and outcome and independent after conditioning on those covariates. Given the binary nature of our outcome variable, we employ the inverse probability weighted regression adjustment or what we call IPWRA. The IPWRA is doubly robust estimator that combines the outcome modeling strategy of regression, adjustment, and the treatment modeling strategy of an inverse probability weight. When we are talking about the probabilistic regression techniques, it is to measure the impact of program characteristics on employment outcomes. We employ a logit regression which uses maximum likelihood estimation of dichotomous dependent variables. Data. Data are used for information of the employment outcomes and programs characteristics of young individuals who completed a TVET program and those who did not. The main limitation of using the LFS are the lack of information on the timing, duration, and other characteristics of the TVET program completed by the individual. In the main findings, we have here the impact of TVET on youth employment outcomes. Under the impact, we have the evidence that TVET causes young individuals to be part of the labor force is confirmed using the IPWRA method. Program completion has no significant positive on employment of young TVET graduates. When evaluating the possible employment effects of TVET, we must also extend our analysis not only in the terms of improved employment rates, but also in the quality of jobs which they are employed. The empirical results suggest that TVET does not help solve the youth underemployment problem. As you can see, Table 8.1, Average Treatment Effect on the Threaded of Technical Vocational Education and Training on Employment Outcomes 2018. The results of the test of covariate balance suggest all the employment outcomes are conditionally independent of TVET completion and justify the use of IPWRA estimator. The WALD test statistics following the indigenous treatment effects estimation point to an absence of the indigeneity and further validates the use of IPWRA estimators. Now, let's move on into the impact of program characteristics on youth employment outcomes. In terms of program characteristics, graduates from enterprise-based TVET programs have higher probabilities of being employed relative to community-based and mobile training programs. In terms of individual, TVET-related characteristics, certified graduates or those who took and passed the competency exam have better odds of becoming employed than those who failed and did not take the exam. Samples are the scholars have higher chances of participating in the labor market and becoming underemployed and non-scholars. The more educated the TVET graduates are, the higher likelihood of experiencing positive employment outcomes. Conclusions and way forward. The role of TVET in upskilling and reskilling the labor force has been more crucial due to the challenge of rapidly changing landscape of work brought by the Industry 4.0 and the widespread job displacement across sectors caused by COVID-19. This study presented in this chapter found strong evidence of a causal impact of TVET on the workforce participation of young individuals not in school nor in training. Although the positive effects of TVET on labor force participation should be acknowledged if it is of particular interest to policymakers and stakeholders of the training system to know how TVET leads empirical methodology. The treatment effect estimators. The problem with using observational data is that the potential outcomes of the same individual cannot be observed, which give the rise missing data problem and thus estimating individual effects. The IPWRA or the inverse probability weighted regression adjustment. The possessors of property were only one of the two models needed to be specified correctly to obtain correct estimates of the treatment effects. Indigenous treatment effect estimators. Suppose we suspect that the treatment assignment is correlated with the potential outcomes. The probabilistic regression techniques. This is to measure the impact of TVET program characteristics of the employment outcomes. Next topic is all about returns to technical and vocational education and training in the Philippines. Estimating the returns to TVET is important for individuals, business, and policymakers. In this chapter, it aims to determine the private rates of return of TVET at the upper secondary, post-secondary, and the tertiary level. Methodological approach. This assessment uses the human capital earnings function or the Minserian equation as the benchmark model. On earnings is the dependent variable and is measured in terms of hourly wage. In education, it represents the level of education of schooling in the total number of years of schooling for various education level. Work experience, approximated by age minus years of the schooling and the age at the start of schooling. Upper secondary education, which include the grade 11 and grade 12. Post-secondary, non-tertiary education, this includes TESDA, NCs or the National Certificates, qualification, other TVET courses, and incomplete qualification. About short cycle tertiary education includes complete and incomplete cycles. Tertiary or higher education also includes complete or incomplete bachelor's and master's or doctorate degrees. Correcting for selection bias in labor force participation, employment, and paid employment. Estimated rates of return may suffer from selection bias as wages are only observed among these in this labor force, those who are employed and those who in particular classes of work. Older men and women with more children are less likely to participate in the labor force. Accounting for selection in labor force participation increases return to schooling. For those in the labor force, older men and women with more children are less likely to be employed. Among those employed, younger men, older men, married women, and women with more children are less likely to work with pay. Accounting for selection in paid employment shows the highest returns to schooling. Selection bias is reduced when accounting for various observed characteristics. Using the Heckman selection model with controls yields as a result in table A 9.2 coefficient in the inverse Mills ratio is significantly only for the model selecting for labor force participation and employment. This means that after accounting for observed characteristic, there is a little bit bias left. For the conclusions, the basic estimate of average rate of return of schooling in the Philippines is comparable to the global and regional average. In fact, it is slightly higher, which may be due to larger variations in earning and schooling in low-income countries, especially across industries and occupations. Notwithstanding the relatively high returns to schooling in the industry or in the country, returns appear to be underestimated due to the selection bias, with some older men and women with more children selected out of labor force, older men and women with more children selected out of employment, and young men and older women and married women and women with more children selected out of paid work. Returns to various levels of education are most positively and generally increasing, which return to early childhood education are insignificant. Return to most level education are significantly positive. Returns to TVET at the upper secondary level are not significant for completion and even negative for incomplete participation. Nevertheless, there are substantial returns to TVET at the post-secondary non-tertiary level. Across TESDA qualification, returns are the highest for services, education and welfare, and arts and humanities. There are also respectable returns to short cycle tertiary level TVET, both for completion and incomplete participation. To our knowledge, this is the first study to estimate returns to TVET in the Philippines and to estimate returns at various levels and for various fields. That ends my report. Thank you for listening.